Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Spectra7 presentation to the LD Micro Conference. Let me make sure I got the clicker working properly here. First, I'd like to remind all of you that our presentation this morning is provided subject to our forward-looking statements, which is also available on our website. Let me start by introducing Spectra7 to you at a high level. Spectra7 is a semiconductor company focused specifically on a category of integrated circuits called high-performance analog, or sometimes known as HPA. The company's products are embedded within a complete cable assembly, typically in the connector at either end of the cable assembly. This is a critical technology to enable next generation of connectivity in a variety of markets, which I'll be talking about later in the presentation, but most importantly, data center interconnect or infrastructure, virtual reality, augmented reality applications, consumer HDMI, and so forth. We are the leader in the categories of active copper cables in the markets that we serve. A handful of key customers on the bottom right-hand side of this logo. Some of our key end customers include people in the PC OEM space, such as Dell, HP, Lenovo, in the virtual reality space, such as Facebook. Foxconn is a key customer of ours, Monster in the HDMI space, and so on and so forth. The company is headquartered in San Jose, Silicon Valley, California, and is listed on Toronto Stock Exchange. And we were incorporated 9 years ago. Spectra7, as I mentioned, is listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange as of the end of September, at the end of our third quarter of 2019. You see the share price, market cap, trailing 12 months revenues of $5.2 million. We're proud of our gross margins, 56% for the 12 months prior, 59% for the third quarter of 2019, and insider ownership of roughly 8%. Okay? When you think about Spectra7 from an investor perspective, I'd like to point out a couple of highlights. First of all, we're addressing very large markets. Even though our revenue scale right now is low, we expect to inflect and grow quite rapidly, particularly driven by the data center infrastructure. In the end markets that we serve, we hold tremendous positions, very strong market share. That includes VR, virtual reality, cabling, data centers, and so forth. These are large markets that are growing. We have significant traction, which I'll talk about in the presentation, particularly within data center interconnects, which we think is one of the most promising, largest, and highest growth markets in the industry as a whole today. And we have top-tier customers that we're very proud of that are committed to Spectra7, have actually gone public with us in press releases over the past couple of years, including names you would recognize, such as Foxconn, such as Molex, Luxshare, and other Tier 1 customers. Because we're in the high-performance analog, or HPA category specifically, we run what's called a CapEx light, capital expenditure light model. Our CapEx is basically lab equipment, testers, and such. We don't invest in infrastructure. We don't invest in our own test equipment or manufacturing equipment. We're a cap light business model. We have a strong team in place that you would see on our website, a very, very strong management team. To give you a recap of our third quarter of 2019, our last reported quarter, revenues grew sequentially 40%, that's 40, to $1.4 million in Q3, and up 27% from the same quarter in the prior year. As I mentioned a minute ago, we're proud of our gross margins. In Q2, they were 55%, and in Q3, 59%. So a sequential increase of 4 full percentage points in Q3 over Q2, and we kept the lid on OpEx. So our operation expenditures from a non-IFRS, which is very similar to a non-GAAP accounting perspective, were flat at $2.5 million, roughly flattish for the past several quarters. We also reported or racked up another 7 design-ins in the data center specifically, for a total of 71 design-ins in data centers specifically. A design-in is defined as a specific SKU of cable that will go to a specific operator. So it's a certain gauge of cable, a certain speed of cable that is custom tailored to a specific data center operator. We now have reported 71 of those as of the end of Q3 of this year. Let me quickly overview the industry for you. Basically, cables are required. Of course, they tether and interconnect systems and devices in a variety of end markets. Cables are typically copper-based. Copper is ubiquitous, highly available. It's a cheap material. The problem with copper cabling is as you put more and more data over it at higher and higher data rates, you can only reach so far. So the reach of the cable shrinks the faster the data rate goes. So copper has inherent limitations. What Spectra7 is about is bringing a new category of electronics embedded within this copper cabling to allow the cabling to carry higher speed data over a thinner gauge. So a thinner cable that's lighter and easier to handle, easier to manufacture, and cheaper than a thick bundle. And you would see the example here on the bottom right, a cable harness or bundle, as it's often known, that's charged or turbocharged or boosted by our device, roughly a tenth of the diameter. Again, a tenth of the diameter of the passive version that's required if you don't have Spectra7 technology to carry the same data rate. Okay? And compared to other connectivity, in particular, I talked about passive copper cables, but also on the far right, active optical cables, or fiber optic cables. The contrast is quite stark. The benefits of passive copper are that it's inexpensive and it's low power consumptions. We extend those benefits with our active technology, but also enable the same high quality data transmission as optical systems over a thin, light, flexible, inexpensive copper cable. Optical, on the other hand, can go farther or longer distances, but it's expensive because of the optical fiber material itself. It's expensive because of the transceivers on either end of the optical cable, and it consumes a lot of power. So we provide a very effective solution for lengths up to about 7 meters, in some cases 10 meters in fact. It's limited to about that range, it doesn't go much further, but that does actually address a very high percentage of use cases. Just quickly, to recap our end markets, as I mentioned, we're very strong in the VR market, the virtual reality market, which is a good market. It's growing slowly. It's a bit lumpy. We have a dominant position in the blue piece of this, which is the PC tether. This is the category of virtual reality devices that are cabled to a laptop or a host of some kind. Okay, we have a dominant position in that piece. The gray piece above it is the game consoles, which is dominated by particularly one vendor. That's obviously Sony with the PlayStation VR. And we have announced that we have a big design in there that we expect to go production sometime in 2020. So we expect our VR business, although lumpy and not necessarily the most exciting part of our story, to continue and at some point also grow with penetration in the game console segment. Very importantly, the data center is where we're focused. That's a very large market, which I'll talk about in a minute. This slide just recaps the variety of customers we have in the VR space, all using Spectra7's patented technology to get thin light cables that connect a VR device, such as any one of the ones you see here, to a host computer, a host PC or a laptop, and so forth. Our technology allows the cable to be light, to be flexible, and not impact the range of motion of the user. In the data center, this is a large and high-growth market. It's expected to reach about $9.8 billion in total TAM for interconnects. This is a tremendous pipeline for us. We're focused on the big 9 operators, 6 in the US and 3 in China. The acronym may or may not be known to all of you, but in North America they're known as the G Mafia, which obviously is Google, Microsoft, AWS, and so forth. We have significant and very important design work going on with a number of these operators today in North America, and we believe that segment of the data center market is actually bigger than the one in China, which is known by the acronym as BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. I'll talk to our penetration in China as well. This is the first place where we've found our mark, if you will. This is a growing segment. Just in 2018, this grew sequentially. It grew year over year 43%. In total capital expenditure to reach $120 billion. So it's very large. It's a very attractive market that's being heavily focused on by a variety of operators. So just to give you a quick look at the technology, within the data center, typically you have cables of different lengths. So for cables up to a couple of meters or so, those are well served by passive cabling. That's not our opportunity. It's passive, off-the-shelf copper cabling. We're able to address what we like to think of as sort of the bulk of the market. So between 2 meters and 7, in some cases 10 meters as well. This is a large segment as they say, you can drive a truck through. It's about 90% of the opportunity. And we bring our active copper cable technology, which brings very low power, interconnect, and low cost to the rack. So you think about a rack of servers and switches and so forth, that is the sweet spot for Spectra7. That's where the bulk of the requirements are between 2 and 7, again in some cases 10 meters. Okay? Above that, it's fiber optic space. We don't try to compete there. That's great. Optics will be around for a long time. It will carry anything above 10 meters and beyond. That's the place for optical technology. We're able to cut the power dissipation very importantly, and this is a critical metric for data center operators. Again, the ilks of, the Tencents and the Baidus and the Amazon and so forth, quite materially. So if you look at this particular slide, I apologize, a little bit technical, but on the bottom left is sort of the older speeds, 1 gig and 10 gig Ethernet. The difference between active optical in red and active copper was very small, was not that material. As you get to 100 gigabits per second, we are about 1/7 the power dissipation of optical. And very importantly, where the market is going, which is 400 gigabits per second, we're able to cut the power dissipation by a factor of 10 as compared to optical. So this is a very compelling slide to our customers and their customers. Okay? You might ask, well, what does this mean? If I'm an operator, how much money am I going to save if I use Spectra7 cabling technology? And on the slide, we distill it down to a bottom line number. And if you take a typical so-called hyperscale data center, which typically houses about 100,000 servers or so, the bottom line is up to $20 million a year, $20 million a year of savings for a data center operator, which is very significant for them because power, cost of electricity is at the top of their operation expenditure stack. We've been making tremendous inroads since we first introduced our products. As I mentioned, last quarter, Q3, we grew sequentially quarter over quarter 40%, driven by our data center revenue growth. We've announced a large number of cabling customers that will build these cable harnesses, copper cable harnesses using Spectra7 on either end for specific end operators. A handful of these are shown on the slide. That includes important cable manufacturers like Amphenol, Foxconn Interconnect Technology, Molex, Xiaolong in China, Luxshare, and so forth. As I mentioned earlier, we racked up 7 new design-ins in Q3 for a total of 71. And most importantly, a few months ago, we announced publicly that Tencent, the second largest data center operator in China, has publicly announced they're going to be deploying Spectra7, and that's a big chunk of what drove our revenues in Q3 sequentially. Okay? It's a very important introduction, and very important that we've also founded a consortium, or co-founded a consortium with Tencent called CRX, which is short for Copper Reach Extension. And this consortium actually seeks to standardize our technology across the industry, bring more and more operators into the fold of using this next generation active copper cable technology. And we're on track. I'm happy to report that we had a very good Q3 in this regard. So just to wrap up, and I see that just a couple more minutes for questions. As hopefully I've shown you, we have a very strong position in the virtual reality market, which, although it's viewed somewhat skeptically by a lot of investors, it's a small market and lumpy, but we expect to grow within that market over time, particularly in the game console, critically in the data center infrastructure, which is a much larger, non-speculative, existing, and high-margin opportunity. We're doing really well. As I've mentioned, we have strong registration with the big 9 operators, the 6 in North America, 3 in China. Tencent now is a public engagement, a big win for us that they have themselves announced, and they're now deploying. And we have a very large swath of design wins that have yet to go to production that we're driving our revenue growth over a number of years. So with that, I think we're done. I'd like to open it up for Q&A. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Active copper market, what is your market share?
In the active copper market, active copper cable market today, we are the only supplier today. So every design and every SKU of active copper cables is developed uses Spectra7 today. Now, I don't know if it's going to remain that way forever. There's an attractive opportunity. I'm sure it will attract competitors, but as of right now, it's ours.
That would be the next question. What intellectual property you have Chinese providers?
Yeah. Well, it's several things. First of all, we have our technology is heavily patented. We have 54 issued patents in this arena. Again, that's 54 patents. So it's a treasure trove of intellectual property. There's also know-how above and beyond the patents that is sort of family crown jewels, right? It's one thing to design a chip, it's another thing to actually integrate it into a copper cable. That's much tougher value proposition. And finally, our products are manufactured in the U.S. Fabrication is done by global foundries in Burlington, Vermont. And there's no equivalent technology in China today. Good question. Any other questions? Okay, I will be outside in the courtyard if there's any other questions. Thank you very much.